Well, some interesting times in Parliament recently. Something which I was doing. I've told some of this story beforehand. My car broke down the other week. I've got a loan car, and the loan car, the radio's not quite up to scratch. It doesn't get the range of stations that my regular car does. So I found myself listening to parliamentary radio last night as I was driving around. Gosh, there's something to cheer you up. Lots of discussion in Parliament. They're back from their break, and lots of things to move forward. Been a busy time in Parliament, and keeping his eye on this and other things, political commentator Dr. Bryce Edwards joins us. Kia ora, Bryce. Thanks for your time.
Morena, Andrew.
It is, I suppose, generally a busy time in Parliament, although seriously, if there should be a safety warning on Parliament radio. Do not drive or use heavy machinery because it's not exactly riveting at times, but I'm sure I'm not as much of a political animal as you are in that regard. One of the things that is being discussed at the moment is changes to process, and this is something which you and I have talked about earlier. The RMA changing so that essentially you've got a triumvirate of ministers who can cut through all the red tape and the green tape if necessary. They can just make stuff happen, particularly for people that have made significant donations to their parties, it seems.
Yes, well, that's the critical take on it, which I happen to share, but let's just remind ourselves on what this is about. New Zealand's got a big infrastructure deficit. We haven't built enough of the roads, the bridges, the hospitals, housing, and part of what's to blame is that we have a very thorough process for handing out consents.
Yep.
When people want to have an impact on the environment with their construction plans. And so National has come up with a plan to fast track certain projects when they think it's of urgent and critical need for the nation, that they can pass this on essentially to permission on to three ministers who can give a quick decision, when someone wants to start an aqua farm or build a housing development or
open a mine, for
whatever.
example.
Well, indeed.
Mines have hit the headlines, I suppose, because Shane Jones, who was a member of this triumvirate, made some statements about multicoloured skinks and farewell to Freddie the Frog if there's coal where he's living. Certainly, typical Shane Jones, he's picking a fight and expecting a bit of pushback on this. He's certainly getting the headlines, but should somebody with, demonstrable disregard for the environment be one of these three?
Well, interestingly, in this proposal, the three ministers that are given the ability to fast track these things are the infrastructure minister, which makes sense, the transport minister, and I think it's the housing minister.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't include the minister responsible for the environment.
Yeah.
And so that might change because this is just a proposal. It's going through the select committee at the moment, and it's come up for a lot of criticisms. And like you said in your introduction, I think there's a lot of people that see this as just an invitation for corruption.
Yeah.
Because you've got very concentrated power in cabinet being able to give out what will be quite big favors to property developers, mining companies, and there's very little transparency about how this process will work. We're going to have a lot of, so it seems, we're going to have a lot of companies that have already tried to get resource consents and they've been declined in the past for environmental reasons. That these new ministers can quite easily just reverse that.
And we've seen a little bit of that already, haven't we? With some of the significant donors to, I think, National and New Zealand First, been sent letters of interest, really, saying, hey, guys, if you want to put your hands up for this project that didn't get approval, register your interest. And these are people who have made significant donations to the parties.
This is absolutely the case. So there's really going to be a need for some scrutiny about, what these relationships are, who these businesses are, if they've supplied, donations to the party. And so, yeah, even some of the supporters of this new legislation do say, "Hey, it's good in general, but there's some big problems here with
Yeah.
transparency and." How does anyone appeal this? There doesn't seem to be any room for challenging this in court. There seems to be no
Although that was, of course, one of the pitfalls with the RMA is it
yeah,
was if you didn't like the answer, just hire more lawyers, take more time, and eventually you might be able to get it across the line. But and I think there's general consensus within Parliament
yeah,
to say that the RMA needs reforming,
absolutely.
but this is a little bit more drastic than some are comfortable with, perhaps.
So yeah, I mean we've kind of gone from a slow track to a very, very fast track,
Mm,
swung from one end of the pendulum to the other. And so and the government's acknowledging they might have to move it back a bit, but by and large, it has got a lot of people worried across the political spectrum, not just the government's opponents and not just environmentalists,
yeah,
but yeah, people that think, well, where's the democracy here? And of course, the likes of Chris Bishop says, well, you can vote us out at the next election if you don't like
yeah.
the things that we built. So it's an ongoing debate,
Mm.
but there will be a lot of controversy over the next few months. And once we see some of these decisions made, and if they do align with the people that have donated money, then yeah, it's going to be fireworks.
Yeah, certainly. And hey, nervous days for the multicoloured skinks of Aotearoa
Yeah,
as well during this time.
indeed.
As well as cutting through the green tape and the red tape, Christopher Luxon's also been cutting some portfolios, a bit of a
Yeah.
cabinet reshuffle, and there's no way of sugarcoating this. Ministers sacked for incompetence, basically, and some people who are better at that job at those jobs moved in.
Yeah, I mean, the government or nor Christopher Luxon are saying this is incompetence, but it is a very clear message that those two ministers, Penny Simmons in the disabilities portfolio and Melissa Lee in the broadcasting and media portfolio, haven't been able to deal with though some of those big issues that have come up, and they've mismanaged them. And so he said he wants more senior ministers to come in and
Yeah,
take those roles. So it's been, yes, I think quite humiliating for those two ministers because they've only been in the job 5 months.
yeah.
And for Melissa Lee in particular, she is, she's already one of the senior
She is senior.
um,
Yeah.
MPs in National. She's been there since, I think, 2008.
Hmm.
And she's been in the portfolio. She's been looking after this area since 2017. So,
Yeah.
she really had no excuses for not being at the top of her game. But look, I think this is probably one of the most popular things that Chris Luxon's done.
Yep.
He's very clearly shown that he has very high standards for performance from his ministers,
Hmm.
and and we're in an age where I think the public do demand that politicians deliver.
Yep. Yep.
And so, sacking two ministers just 5 months in really does send that signal that the other ministers need to watch out, that they really do need to deliver, and that this government's going to be accountable. So
Now, both of
we've
these
seen support.
Both of these ministers still have junior roles, now both outside
Yeah.
of cabinet. One was before, now both of them outside of cabinet. Cries of misogyny from Te Pāti Māori, although one of the replacements was a woman. Not sure how that works.
Yeah, I mean, we live in an age also where there's a lot of sensitivity about, historical discrimination and the place of women and Maori in politics,
Yep.
etc. And so I think there's always a lens that some people look at these things through. Is this a gendered thing? Is this a racist thing? And I don't think that many New Zealanders would really view it this way. I mean, certainly. There were also some criticisms that previously Luxon hadn't put the climate change portfolio inside cabinet. He
Yep.
hadn't
Yep.
been, sympathetic enough towards the need to take progress on climate change. But now we have Simon Watts, who is the climate change minister, coming into cabinet, and so that's a boost for the kind of the green image of this. This government. So yeah,
Perhaps balances
look,
out the
I don't
damage
think
done by Shane Jones in the same week in that regard. I mean, you talked about how
indeed.
this is a little bit seen to be a popular response from the Prime Minister. But speaking of popularity, It doesn't look good for the government with the latest poll results. And I mean, I was never a mathematician, Bryce, but doing the numbers, doesn't look like anybody could govern with the latest figures.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit early in the parliamentary cycle to do all the kind of MMP calculations about, who could govern. But if you look at the trends, National and their right-wing coalition partners have been dropping in support just a little.
Yeah.
And it's not a huge drop, and there's been some other polls to show this as well, but it's going in the wrong direction. And you don't normally get this in the first year of a new government. Normally you have something of a honeymoon, and for some reason we're still, we, the public,
Yep.
are still rather gloomy, discontented, hard to please. And of course, we've got very bad economic stats at the moment, so there's a lot to be grumpy about.
Yep.
But yeah, the government will be worried about this because it's not unprecedented, but it's certainly not what you want in the first 6 months.
One of the things with polls, of course, is there's a time lag. So this poll happened back in time. Things have happened since then. I'd probably take more than a minor cabinet reshuffle for National to get the poll boost back in the opposite direction. But yeah, it's quite fickle in that regard. It's a snapshot in time. Things have moved on. People's opinions change, I suppose.
Look, I think that's right. And this latest One News poll caught a wee bit, during the time that they were polling, caught a wee bit of the reaction to that cabinet shuffle. But I don't think it would have caught much of it. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see if that's changed things around. But I just think, as John Key said yesterday, this is about economics, not politics.
Yeah.
People are sort of turning their thumbs down a bit towards politicians at the moment, not necessarily because they dislike the government, but just because they are, they're worried. They're worried about inflation, about interest rates, unemployment, and they just feel a bit gloomy and discontented.
I suppose we'll wait and see whether or not the budget and the ever-promised tax cuts puts a smile on the face of the squeezed middle. And gives a bump in the poll to the government from there on in. Bryce, appreciate your insights as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.